Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 237 of the Book Cougars, two middle-aged women on the hunt for a good read. I'm Emily.
And I'm Chris. And Emily is dialing in today from Carbondale, Colorado.
Yes, I'm sitting in the Carbondale Public Library in a delightful meeting room, literally at the base of Mount Sopris. Pretty beautiful.
Wonderful.
Very hot, so I'm glad to be in an air-conditioned building. My son does not have air conditioning. And so what you do around here is, it gets really cool at night. So you open all the windows at night and put fans on, and then you scurry around in the morning and close all the windows and shades and try to keep the house cool. Nice. But we are surviving.
Good. Glad to hear it. Meanwhile, yeah. I'm here at Book Cougars headquarters in Connecticut, where it's scorching as well. People here, at least on the shoreline, tend to get in the water or sit by the water because the breeze is really lovely and cool, even though it's scorching away from the water.
Yes, indeed. We hope you guys are all staying comfortable and have a good book in your hand.
Or in your ears.
Yes.
All right, we have some thank yous. We have two wonderful new patrons to thank for joining our community. Thank you so much to Loretta and Sue.
We're so happy to have you.
So, Emily, what are you currently reading? Let's just dive right in.
I'm currently reading The Garden by Clare Beams. This is actually a book that we had considered for one of our Q3 read-alongs, I guess, or just a quarterly read-along. We weren't sure which quarter. We weren't sure if it was ghosty enough. So we decided that we wanted to read it and we would just do it as a buddy read. I started reading it on the airplane, but we are officially kicking it off the day that this episode drops, which is July 1st.
Right. I'll probably start reading it just around that day. And then we'll be discussing it on episode 238, which will drop on, what is that, July 15th?
Yeah. So a couple of weeks to read it. I can tell you that I'm already about halfway through. It was a very quick read and really interesting. I got the audiobook that's narrated by Carlotta Branton, I think is her name. Maybe it's Brenton. It's around 9 hours. I haven't dipped into it, but I plan to now that I, have the story really in my heart and know what's going on. I'm not even going to tell you what it's about. You can look it up. We'll put it in the show notes and read about it. But since we're going to be talking about it as a buddy read, I thought I would just tell you I've already started.
Awesome. And that it's a quick read so far. That's good to hear. We also have a Goodreads thread for discussing The Garden. If you're interested in going to Goodreads, looking for Book Cougars, and then you can see the different conversation threads we have. There's one in a folder called Buddy Reads, and that's where you'll find The Garden. And feel free to share your comments, questions. If you are making a comment that has a spoiler, just write spoiler with some exclamation points and return a couple times and then write it, just so you don't spoil it for anyone else. But people who have read it then could see that it's a spoiler and they can jump in and respond.
Yes, we're looking forward to your comments. It has a very cool cover. It kind of looks like the female internal organs with ovaries made out of flowers.
Yeah.
More to come on that.
I'm still curious about those dangly bits.
Yes. Again, that was The Garden by Clare Beams. What are you reading, Chris?
I am reading SILAS Marner by George Eliot, and I'm enjoying it so much. It is a story about a guy named Silas. He's young at the beginning. He was engaged. A friend betrayed him. He ends up leaving town and becoming a weaver in this small village where at the time everyone is very leery of newcomers, outsiders. Like if you don't know someone's family, you don't really warrant any attention or trust. And George Eliot does such a great job with describing people's lives and how they feel and think about things. It's kind of omniscient, so you're hearing about what Silas is thinking. And then it jumps to other characters. There's the squire who has 4 sons. The wife died, so these boys is being completely given whatever they want. And the 2 eldest sons are also characters in this book. And I don't want to give any spoilers either, because, I know this is a classic. I know it was published over 100 years ago. So just because it's a classic doesn't mean you can't spoil it. Because what I'm enjoying so much is just her prose. I really enjoy reading her. I learn new words whenever I read George Eliot, and maybe I'll share some of those after I finish the novel. But there are really surprising plot twists that I don't see coming. And it's lovely. I just finished book 1 last night in this, so I think it's about maybe 65% through at this point. Silas Marner, George Eliot.
It's funny. I still think as far as small town living goes, it's still the same. Like, I think some people can be really welcoming and some people are like, prove yourself first. Stranger danger.
Yeah. Well, when Laura and I were first looking to move to Connecticut, and we'd come and drive up the coast and everything and try and figure out where we wanted to live. Actually, we would go from Connecticut to Maine, and we were in a small town in Maine, in York, Maine, which I know you've been there. And we were having breakfast, and the waitress we were chatting with, we were talking about moving to New England. And she's like, it's tough in some places. She's like, I've been here 20 years and they still call me the new girl.
Right. Exactly. So if your family doesn't go back to the Mayflower, then it's trouble. Yeah. Yep. That's funny.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm glad you're digging in with that one. I know it's been on your list for a long time. I am just starting Cooking in Real Life, which is a cookbook by Lidey. I never know how to pronounce her name. Heuck, I think. She's very active on social media. And there's a foreword in this cookbook by Ina Garten. And Lidey's story is kind of fun. She was graduating college and just on a whim sent Ina, because she kind of knew somebody who knew Ina, sent her a copy of her resume and said, I'd really like to help you with social media. I don't think Ina had any social media presence at the time. And so Ina said, sure, okay. And this young whippersnapper shows up. She was wearing like a pencil skirt. She tells a story of like she was dressed kind of for business and came and had prepared an entire social media portfolio for Ina. And Ina was really skeptical. And then by the end of the interview, she totally was engaged with what Lidey was talking about. And she ended up working for Ina for 7 years, fresh out of college. This high-profile woman in the cooking world. And Lidey, I don't think she was really interested in getting into cooking. She just wanted to help Ina. And now she's become this revered writer. She writes for the New York Times. Her recipes are really accessible. So if you're looking for recipes, as the bottom of the cookbook cover says, delicious and doable recipes for every day, I highly recommend you take a peek at this cookbook. So far, I'm mostly just through both Ina's foreword and then Lidey's introduction. Also follow her on social media on Instagram if you are on Instagram. Cooking in Real Life, Lidey Heuck.
Very cool. Great inspirational story.
Yeah, I heard an interview with her and someone was like, how did you have the nerve to send Ina Garten your resume? And she was like, I was young. I didn't know that I was being nervy.
Right. Yeah.
I was just looking for a job out of college. But it goes to show, I'm a believer in asking for what you want, like going for it. That's a perfect example. Chris, what did you just read?
Well, I finished The Shining by Stephen King, which I talked a bit about last time. It's one of my favorite horror novels, and it's a keeper. It holds up, I think. I should give a little synopsis of what The Shining is about. If you're not familiar with the story of The Shining, it is about a man named Jack Torrance who is an alcoholic. He had been teaching at a really swank prep school, and bad things happened. He gets fired. They're living in Colorado, and he has a friend who gets him a job as the winter caretaker at this very fancy hotel up in the mountains. And the concern is that a prior caretaker had basically killed his wife, children, and then himself. So they're very much wanting to know if Jack has the, mental stamina to do this. And what about your family? Of course, it's the 1970s. And he's like, they're good. And then Danny, their son. So it's Jack, Wendy, and Danny. Danny has what is called the shine. And I won't say more about that. So there's a lot of tension building up from the very beginning with Jack, who is trying to be sober so he can get back on track with the family life and also finish this play that he's been writing. Will he or won't he drink? Will he or won't he get the job? Well, he gets the job. And you've probably all heard of cabin fever. Multiply cabin fever by a huge hotel and potential ghosts. And I think you have a really good story. So that's The Shining in a nutshell. It was published in 1977. And what sticks into my head is that some of the internalized racism that one of the characters has, Halloran is his name, might be a little dated for some people just in terms of the content of that internalized racism. Like, I know people have internalized racism still today. I'm not saying that's gone away, but maybe the representation of it also by somebody who would be Black, as Halloran is, might be a little bit different. The N-word is used by one of the characters who is a reprehensible guy. He's not in there a lot. He also calls women a whole array of different names. Obviously not a good man, but he's not around for long. Those are just the disclaimers about how it's not aging all that well in that context. Otherwise, the story itself, I thought was fantastic. And the relationship between Jack, the main character, Wendy, his wife, and then Danny, their son, I thought were really well done. You know, the story is classic. It's a haunted house story set in a huge hotel in the middle of Colorado in the winter where they close the road after a certain time of year because it's not worth it to plow all the way up there, right? And what's fascinating is I also did watch the movie, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, I think, during Biblio Adventures. The movie ending was changed, and something happens to Halloran in the movie that I was just like, WTF, really? So more on that later. I should also say the novel is very much about alcoholism. Stephen King, I don't know if he was just trying to become sober when he wrote this or was still drinking or a ways into his sobriety, but there's a lot about that. So there's the psychological torment of being an alcoholic, being married to an alcoholic, being the child of an alcoholic. And then there are also things going on in the hotel that are supernatural. And, you know, they're snowed in for the winter.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah. And it's quite scary.
As I sit here in Colorado and having been snowed in twice last year and this year when I came to visit and couldn't get home, I was living in a nice warm house, not in this creepy hotel. I can only imagine the setting must be so scary.
Yeah.
And these passes that you can't drive on, you know, for the entire winter.
Yeah. And I should say a little bit that one of the things that didn't pan out for me very well as somebody who grew up with snow and knows what it's like to drive in the snow. I've lived in mountains and I know snow is a very different thing on winding mountain roads. Halloran, off season, he lives in Florida and he comes back. Anyway, Halloran's driving in the snow up these mountain passes. He doesn't know how to drive in the snow. He's never driven in the snow. And he gets so far that I thought this is a bit realistic. Although, you know, he almost does drive off the edge a couple times and almost gets slammed by a plow truck, which scary as you know what when that happens.
Wait, you said it's realistic. Did you mean unrealistic? Or
well,
it seemed realistic?
Some of what happens is a little realistic, you know, in terms of like, you know, spinning out and feeling like, oh, I'm going over the edge and then almost getting hit by a snowplow. You know, they're huge ass trucks for those of you who've never seen a big snowplow. It was unrealistic to me that Halloran would be driving in those conditions and get as far as he did. I just was a little skeptical about that.
Oh, I get that. I mean, I'm scared to drive on some of these passes on a beautiful sunny day. They're scary.
Well, especially...
and they have no guardrails.
Right? Yeah, it's just like driving up the coast of California. Laura and I always do it from south to north because going north to south, she would be in the passenger seat looking over the edge. And yeah, we'd both probably, you know, collapse from heart palpitations.
Yes. And we should say that The Shining is on our Ghost story bingo card. So Chris also got a square on her bingo card.
Yeah, I'm super happy about that. And then I also watched a film adaptation, so I'll have 2 squares for this. The Shining. I know we have Stephen King fans. This is one of his earlier classic novels. I love it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm sorry. Chris tried to get me to read it with her. I didn't. I'm sorry, but not sorry.
I don't know. I think you might like it.
Okay.
I think you might, because Wendy is a really interesting character in the novel. She doesn't get a great rep in the movie, but in the novel, she's a much more dynamic character who has agency.
Okay. I'll see.
One of these days.
I know you and the gentleman caller are both trying to get me to read Stephen King.
We'll wear you down.
Yeah. Well, I read Memorial Days by Geraldine Brooks. And this was unexpected. This is one that I was at the library returning something, and I saw it on the Quick Picks and decided to grab it. And it's a memoir about her grieving her husband, Tony Horowitz, who was also a well-known author. And he literally was on book tour and was in Washington, D.C., very close to where he grew up, his family home, and fell and died of a heart incident. So the shock of that, you know, those kind of deaths where you're not prepared. I ended up reading it and also listening to it. She narrates the audiobook. It would have satisfied our reading salon that we just had, which we'll talk about on Biblio Adventures, because it came in at, I want to say, like 208 pages. It's a very short, very specific book about her experience. It's been several years since he's passed. He died in 2019, and this book just came out in 2025. And one of the points she's making with it is that we don't really allow people time to grieve. You know, I think a lot of companies give people like a couple days off to grieve or to attend funerals or something like that. And that we all know that have experienced death in our lives, that it's a process that ebbs and flows and takes some time. And she really covers this in the book. When someone dies, particularly when it's someone who you're in relationship with, there's a lot of work to do. The funeral and getting the death certificate and just some of the basics. And I think in some ways that helps people deal with their grief because they have something else to think about. But this is after that period of time. Part of it, the book goes back and forth. It goes back to 2019 in West Tisbury, Massachusetts, which is on Martha's Vineyard, which is where they had a family home, and then also goes to a town in Australia where she has taken herself now these years later to grieve because she is an Aussie. They had at times lived in Australia, and so she talks about that. A couple of takeaways that I wanted to talk about. One is that it's a memoir, but it's also really a love story. I mean, these two loved each other. They met in college. They were both journalists and traveled to lots of interesting, sometimes scary places. And she talks about the history of how they met. And then they had a biological son and also adopted a son from Ethiopia. And he's in high school, I believe, when Tony passes away. So there's some really poignant scenes about her talking about how to talk to her children about this. And then the other takeaway for me with married couples is it's very common for married couples to have their, quote, jobs, right? Like you deal with the finances, I deal with the groceries or whatever it is. And she had a couple really shocking things she had to deal with after their marriage. One thing that happened, like they had this adoptive son. They had adopted him when he was really young. And when the will ended up having to go through probate, and they were like, well, we're not sure that you can keep your son. And they appointed like a CASA volunteer who are people who are appointed to protect children. And this kid is, you know, like he's almost an adult.
Oh my God. And they've had him his whole life. Like that is just insane.
Yeah. And then the other thing that shocked me was she had a problem with her credit card because it was in, Tony was like the main credit card holder, even though she had a card and they'd shared it for years and years and years. So when he died upon his death, they canceled all her credit card. And she went to get a new credit card and they gave her like a really low credit limit because she didn't have a credit score. So a reason for you to always have a credit card in your own name, I guess.
Oh, yeah. Laura and I do. I mean, we're both on each card, but one is the primary on different cards because it's messed up.
Yeah. I haven't been married for a million years. So I didn't even know about that. But I just thought I would tell people that her memoir was really poignant and interesting to learn about them and their relationship. But then she also pointed out some of these things that know what's going on. Even if you're young and you think like this couldn't possibly happen. He was a young man. So I loved it. It was very short. Her writing is beautiful. She narrated it beautifully. I highly recommend it. It's called Memorial Days by Geraldine Brooks.
And one of our quarterly read-alongs back when we did the Summer of Little Women was her novel, March, which was about the Alcott family.
Yeah. And you loved People of the Book.
Yes.
And then the book that most recently came out was Horse, which was the novel she was working on when he passed away. And that's one of the things she talks about. Like, she ends up finishing it and going on book tour. And it's kind of after all that she's like, I need to have some time to grieve my loss here.
Yeah.
And that's where this memoir came in.
Wonderful. Sometimes the unanticipated reads can be just so fantastic.
Yeah.
They just get you at the right moment.
Mm-hmm. I know I'm really having a moment with memoir. I mean, I think I have always enjoyed them, but I've really read some good ones recently.
Well, we can talk about something you didn't read.
Wah, wah. I didn't do my homework, everyone.
Well, I did the homework 30 minutes before we started recording, so we're both in the same situation with Thrawn Janet by Stevenson, which is the next story in our Penguin Ghost Stories book. We were supposed to have read it and discussed it on this episode, but we are going to be human and postpone the conversation until next time because I'm not exactly sure what I read and Emily didn't read it. So we'll be prepared with our homework next episode.
Yeah, it sounds like maybe one that we need to read twice, which I've had to do with several of these. So I'm going to try reading it once by next episode.
Well, another thing about that story is it has a lot of Scottish dialect and words. And I read it, but I want to listen to it as well because I also have that book on audio. So I think it'd be great to do both and to really understand the words because Thrawn means like twisted.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So I think that would be very helpful to actually know what all the words mean and really get into the story more. So the other story we'll be discussing, in addition to Thrawn Janet, is The Open Door by Margaret Oliphant. So episode 238 will have a double header for ghost stories.
Doubling down. I finished another book. It's a novel called So Far Gone by Jess Walter, and this just published at the beginning of June. Jess Walter is one of those authors that every one of his novels is different. You know, like the subject matter is so different, which is so impressive to me. And one of the things I loved about it is the chapter titles were all the same, and they were What Happened to Blah, 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 and it was a character in the story. So the first chapter is What Happened to Rhys Kinnick, who's our main protagonist in the novel. And then as the story unfolds and some other character comes in, then he'll say, what happened to that character? I thought that was such an interesting way to move the story along. The story takes place soon after the 2016 election. So we're in present day. And Rhys had been a journalist, but he's now living somewhat off the grid. This takes place in the Pacific Northwest and has become a bit of a recluse because he got himself into some trouble at a Thanksgiving dinner where he may have punched his son-in-law who was talking about some political things that he didn't agree with. And his daughter wasn't very happy with him. So he moved off the grid to a family homestead that no one had been living at. At the very beginning of the novel, his daughter's children, so his grandchildren, show up at the front door with a woman who's a neighbor. And the mother, his daughter, had left a note in her daughter's shoe saying, if I ever disappear, if anything happens to me, this is where you need to take them. And it's to their grandfather's house.
Wow.
And the story takes off from there. This is one I don't want to spoil at all. I will say that I'd read it and listened to the audiobook, which was narrated by Eduardo Ballerini. If you get the Libro.fm advanced listener copies, this was one of them. And so I had downloaded it. It started to bother me a little bit because whenever there was dialogue for the main character, Rhys Kinnick, he was speaking in an odd way. And then I realized it's because early on in the novel, he gets decked really hard and his jaw gets messed up. And so that's why he's speaking that way. And I have this aha moment, like, why is this guy talking? It's the narrator making him sound so weird. And then I was like, oh, he got punched in the jaw. So the relationship with him and his grandchildren, there's Christian militia that show up. There is a retired cop that makes an appearance. Journalists that Reese had worked with in the past. It's a great cast of characters, which I think is one of Jess Walter's strengths in his writing. So I highly recommend it. So Far Gone, Jess Walter. I would also recommend his book, Beautiful Ruins. And I think it was called Cold Millions, might have been his last one. Just a great writer. I'm always excited to see when he has something new out.
Oh, very cool. I don't think I've read anything by him yet. So somebody to add to my list. Yes.
Yeah. Chris, have you gone on any Biblio adventures?
I did. I went to the Guilford Free Public Library here in Guilford and attended their Bloomsday celebration, which was on June 16th, as Bloomsday celebrations always are around the world. And this was my first time attending one. I read Ulysses a couple of years ago for the first time and was, blown away and confused and frustrated and happy to have read it. All of the things that people feel about Ulysses. And this event was going to be a reading of certain sections of Ulysses, and just fans of Ulysses or curious people, literature lovers coming together. And they did it in the community room at the library, which we've talked about in past events, like most recently, Matthew Goodman's event was there, and it was packed. It was like standing room only.
Wow.
Yeah. I was surprised. The way they advertised it was a professor, Dr. Lee Jacobus, professor emeritus from the University of Connecticut, was going to be talking about Ulysses, is what I thought from what the library described it. But actually, it was a group of actors who came and were sitting in a row of chairs, and they all read different sections of Ulysses from beginning to end. And in between each reading, Lee explained what was going on in the story so you could understand. And it was so much fun.
Really cool.
Yeah, it was really cool. And our friend Julie Fitzpatrick was one of the actors. She has a great Irish accent. And when I complimented her on it, she's like, well, with a last name like mine, it has to be good, which was really good.
She'll lose all street cred.
Right. It really brought the sections of the novel to life a little bit more. And I really enjoyed that aspect of the event. And then another aspect of the event was the food. Somebody had baked 2 different types of soda bread, because bread is important in the novel. Also, ginger cookies. And then they had grapes. And apparently, from what Dr. Lee Jacobus, I think, was the one who told this story, that when he first talked with the library director about doing this event and they agreed on it, the library director went straight to town hall and asked if he can have an alcohol permit for this event. So Emily just got really big eyes because they had Guinness beer and then James whiskey.
Wow.
Yeah, which is unusual for our library.
Yeah.
And it was really lovely to have. The soda bread was delicious. It was slathered with butter. The ginger cookies were the most gingery I've ever had. Yeah, really.
I wonder if someone made them or if they're like some Irish company that they ordered cookies from.
Oh, I wonder. Yeah, but they're really good. So
that ginger in Ireland is probably much better than the ginger we get here. I'm just making that up. I have no idea.
But yeah, who knows? But they didn't hold back on the ginger, and I love ginger, so it was good.
With the professor talking about the sections, did you learn things that you didn't understand when you read it?
That's a good question. I understood what was going on. Like, I remember the story enough to understand what was going on, but it was just sometimes some of those sentences that, or paragraphs or pages even, that like you'd had to read a couple times maybe to try and keep your mind focused on it, because it's some guy's, stream of consciousness that it's hard to, I can't even follow my own thoughts sometimes. So trying to follow somebody else's, it's a bit much.
Or my mind wanders when I'm reading. So to be reading someone's mind wandering seems like it'd be doubly difficult.
Yeah. But it was a really fun event. And I asked the director if it was the first time they were doing it because I didn't recall it. And he said it was the first official one. So Ulysses was published in 1922. So I heard a woman talking about how they had a small celebration when the novel turned 100. But this was their first official Bloomsday celebration. And considering how well it was attended, I have a feeling it won't be their last.
And become an annual thing. How fun. Well, I went to Princeton, New Jersey. My son Jacob and daughter-in-law Nicole and grandson Bo were showing up for a wedding. And so my daughter Rachel and her daughter Nina, my other grandchild, were joining them. The two grandchildren had never had a chance to meet, so that was really fun. And I crowdsourced with people fun things to do in Princeton. The joke's on me because all I did in Princeton was hang out with my grandkids. It actually ended up being very rainy, like downpour. It is no fun to walk around in downpours, especially with babies. So we did get one chance when the weather cleared to walk around campus, which was really beautiful. I think graduation was over. The campus was really quiet. I didn't see a single student. But they have sculptures all around campus. So that was fun to do. And then we walked very briefly through downtown. I saw the bookstore from a distance. I think it's called Labyrinth Books, but didn't get to shop. But one thing Rachel and I did do on the way was stop in Montclair, New Jersey, which is a place I've always wanted to go. It's kind of a suburb of New York City, I would say. A lot of people live there and commute. And we stopped at the Montclair Public Library. One of the things Chris and I have discovered on our Biblio adventures is that a library is always a great place for a restroom stop and to stretch your legs. And for Nina, it was really important for her to get a little crawl in. The drive was a little bit longer than a nap, so she was getting antsy and she's crawling now. So it was really nice to stop at a library, get cooled off. It was a really hot day, and stretch our legs and, sit in comfy chairs and feed Nina a bottle and give her a crawl about. So that was the most bookish thing I ended up doing on that weekend trip. It was very fast and furious. It was mostly driving and having babies sleep in my lap, which isn't a bad thing.
That's lovely. And I have to say, I giggled a little bit when you said they hadn't had a chance to get together, the grandkids, and they're like both under 12 months. So it's, it's so sweet.
It was their first meetup. But it's funny because Bo started chatting a lot. The week after, which could have just been, a coincidence, but they think it's maybe because he heard Nina chattering a lot, because Nina is very chatty.
Interesting. Yeah.
One of the many things Nina will probably teach Bo in his lifetime.
Oh, those older cousins. Look
That's
out.
right.
Well, I did watch The Shining, as I mentioned earlier. This was a 1980 movie adaptation by Stanley Kubrick. He wrote the screenplay along with novelist Diane Johnson. Now, Stephen King actually wrote the first screenplay, but Kubrick, as you and I talked last episode, and King had a bit of a falling out about very important aspects of the story itself. One of the things that is a big red flag in terms of having a director direct your novel that includes ghosts is that Kubrick doesn't believe in ghosts or any sort of afterlife. When you die, that's it, is what he has said. So he really kind of focused on the Jack going off the deep end aspect of it. And Stephen King wasn't a fan of Jack Nicholson doing it because he was already associated with One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. So people anticipated that he would be going over, the deep end, for lack of a better way of saying that. And so Kubrick said that King's screenplay was too literal an adaptation. So I did watch the movie. It was painful to watch it right after reading the novel again, because the novel portrays the adults as adults who both have their own agency. Granted, Wendy doesn't have a job, so she is reliant on Jack financially in that way. But the way she's portrayed in the movie, it's just really hard to watch. And I think Kubrick really kind of rested on racism and misogyny for some of the scenes. And some of the scenes are just like Jack Nicholson just staring into the camera. I'm like, oh, come on. I realize it's also the 1980s and movie making was a bit different back then. But one of the cool things was, have you seen the movie?
No, I mean, I've seen like images of the scenes, like the one shot like down the long hallway and Jack Nicholson typing on a typewriter, like all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy.
Yeah, and see, that's not in the novel.
Oh, interesting.
That is not in the novel. In the novel, he's working on a play.
Okay.
And then there's a book idea that comes to him. But in the movie, this is something, that is not in the novel at all, him writing that. Yeah. Just one more thing about that, because I did read some interviews. I couldn't help myself. I went down a little bit of a bunny hole. That Stephen King, he didn't just like the movie, but he also thought that Kubrick made movies to, quote, hurt people.
Oh, interesting.
Which I'd like to know more about that. He also said that The Shining was like a Cadillac without an engine. You get in, you can smell the leather, but you can't drive it anywhere. And I thought that was really interesting because I kind of did feel that it wasn't a really great adaptation. And I know it's considered a classic now. And there were some really fantastic things that the movie did. Like there are scenes where Danny's riding his Hot Wheel all through the hotel and the shot is from behind him and following him along. And that was done with a new piece of movie equipment that stabilized the camera so that you could follow things so clearly and not have all the bouncing and everything going on. The Shining is known for the first movie to really utilize that.
Yeah, so maybe Kubrick was more interested in, the directorial aspect of how to make the film. And of course, King's more interested in it being a true adaptation of the novel. I wonder how it influenced King moving forward because so much of his work has been adapted. And there have been really good adaptations.
Now, how much of it was Kubrick just being an egomaniac at the time? I mean, he sounds like a very cruel director, too. He's known for making actors do scenes over and over, like 50, 80. There's one scene on the stairs with Wendy and Jack. He made her do that scene over 107 times.
Wow.
One scene, they did that. And so I just kind of think there's something a little off going on there, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, he made a lot of good movies, so maybe times are just different.
Yeah.
But now, next, I will be watching the miniseries that Stephen King wrote the screenplay for. Maybe be next episode. We'll see. I do want to watch it soon while the novel's still fresh in my head.
Yeah, I want to hear your reaction, so I hope you can watch it in the next couple of weeks. That'd be great. Well, part of the reason that I'm in Colorado is because my son Jacob, who owns Roaring Fork Mill, was invited to the Aspen Food and Wine Festival. Really cool. This is a 3-day event in Aspen, Colorado, where a lot of winemakers, and unbeknownst to me, I mean, I've never been to this, it was also beer and cocktails and a lot of mocktails, which are really hot right now, non-alcoholic beverages. They set up these booths in these beautiful tents right in a park in downtown Aspen. And then in between, there are breaks. So there's a morning time when people flow through these tents and taste wine and food, etc. And then there's a break where there are a lot of chefs who are doing demonstrations or having panel conversations. And then there's another afternoon where they flow through these tents again and taste and drink, and then more panels. So this goes on for 3 days. So we didn't really know what to expect. We didn't know if these chefs were going to be there. We had this list. I'm showing Chris. It's like pages long of the schedule of all the different chefs and the panels that they were going to be on. So we had marked up, the people we would love to see. But we had service passes. So when these 2 different times where people could walk through the tents were over, we had to actually physically turn in our passes, which meant they were like, you are not welcome to sit in on any of these panels.
Aww.
And they're not selling anything either. The winemakers aren't selling anything. It's all just tastings. So Jacob had his flour, and we had made graham crackers and shortbread cookies, and people were tasting them, and he could talk about the flour. But he had brought flour because he thought maybe chefs would also be strolling through the booths. But upon reflection, of course they don't, because people would just mob them, including people like me, because one of the chefs I was most excited about is Mashima Bailey, who owns a restaurant called The Gray in Savannah. And I've talked about her book on episode 164. It's called Black, White, and the Gray, the story of an unexpected friendship and a beloved restaurant. And this book is by Mashama Bailey and John O. Morisano. And they opened a restaurant in an old Greyhound station in Savannah. And the book talks a lot about racism because Savannah has a history of racism. The Greyhound station still had very clear signs like white people only for the drinking fountains. And there was a room where Black people had to wait to catch the bus. So they really talk about how as a Black woman and a white man, they established this friendship and grew this restaurant. And I just found out they're opening one in Paris, which is really cool. But she was also just the cover star on the most recent Cherry Bomb magazine that I got. That's called The Power Issue. It just came out. And this is the first time Cherry Bomb has done 4 different cover models, and you could choose. It was really hard to choose. Wow. It's a great issue. The Power Issue features a bunch of female chefs and people in the food industry, food and drink industry. So I showed up to Jacob's booth holding my book and my magazine in the event that Mashama happened to stroll by. She didn't, but that's okay. But who I did stroll by in kind of the inner sanctum where people are putting together their booths and things like that was Nancy Silverton, who is someone I revere. I kept myself together. I didn't ask for an autograph or anything. I just stopped walking and watched her walk by. She's very sweet. She wears a bunch of barrettes in her hair, like shiny barrettes. It's one of the things she's known for. And she's the author of The Cookie That Changed My Life, which is a cookbook I've talked about often and that our beloved listener sent us a copy of. Thank you, Catherine. That was a gift to us this year. So that was a fun moment for me. And that was the only chef that I spied, but it was a pretty good one to spy. I have an Ingredient One post where I talked about my love for Nancy Silverton, so I will put that in the show notes. And it was just a really fun weekend. It was a proud mother moment to hear Jacob talking about regenerative organic farming and his flour and to get feedback on these little treats that we made for people to taste. It was really fun.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
It makes me think of Harry Potter in an odd way, just because I know one year Daniel Radcliffe went to one of the Comic Cons in a Spider-Man costume. So he was covered head to foot. Nobody knew who he was, but he had always wanted to attend, I guess.
Wow.
And I thought that's really clever, but that wouldn't fly at this kind of event you were just describing.
I mean, Aspen has a lot of big cowboy hats and sunglasses, so they might be able to get by with costuming up in that way. But I think a Spider-Man outfit would probably make them stand out.
Yeah, for sure. Did you have any other Biblio adventures?
Well, we had our reading salon.
Oh my gosh. Yes, we did.
With our Patreons. Yes.
That was a wonderful conversation. Like, we talked about short books. So books around 200 pages or less.
Yeah. Chris and I hung up from the Zoom conversation. Well, we should say everyone else hung up, and Chris and I stuck around for a minute to talk. And it's always amazing how many books we don't know about and what great readers our listeners are. Mm-hmm. So thank you for telling us about all these books that you read and growing our TBR as well.
Absolutely. And it's a real skill to be able to sell a book. And they're also skilled at making me want to read every book that's mentioned.
Absolutely.
I mean,
and even if I don't want to read them, it's also like, oh, I want to get that for so-and-so. They'll love it, Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really cool.
Really good.
And we should remind people, I know we have a lot of new listeners. We're hearing from you. Thank you and welcome. That Patreon is a community that we have where you can help to support the podcast. You can contribute as little as $1 and up to $50 a month to help support the real costs we have to produce this every other week for you. And for those of you who contribute $5 or more per month, we have a monthly reading salon that takes place on the fourth Sunday of the month at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. It's a Zoom conversation. It's a friendly bunch, and we talk about different things every month.
Yeah, we usually have a topic of some kind. It was short books. Before that, we did big books. And as I said, during the salon, we're oversized for a little while. And next month, we'll have a topic of some kind.
Yes, maybe we'll announce that on the next episode. So that was really fun. It's always nice to catch up with some listeners.
Absolutely.
Do you have any upcoming jaunts, Chris?
Well, I don't have anything specific, but I do know I'm looking forward to my Cougar buddy coming back so that maybe next Wednesday we can go on a Biblio adventure together. And I know some of that will depend on the weather, on what we do.
Yes. We've had a long couple of months of us traveling. Chris was in Chicago, and then she was in Nebraska, and then I've come to Colorado. So we're excited to just do something bookish together, even if we just end up sitting and reading on the porch.
Right. Exactly. Yes.
Speaking of which, my big upcoming jaunt is some time in my hammock to read. I cannot wait to just have a day, like maybe even one of those days where you just start a book and finish it all in one day.
And take a nap somewhere in between. Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or a couple naps. And then the only other upcoming jaunt I have is one that's actually virtual. It's already been recorded, so I'll put a link in the show notes if any of you would like to watch it. One of the things I've missed this week is the launch of Amy Bloom's new novel, I'll Be Right Here, which I really enjoyed. And she had her book launch event at Books Are Magic in Brooklyn, which is where her daughter Sarah Moon lives. So she moderated the event. So it was a mother and daughter event. I was supposed to go to their mother and daughter event at RJ's for Sarah's book launch of Family Week, which is her new YA novel. And I ended up not being able to go. I registered and had a conflict that night. But her book launch at Books Are Magic was recorded.
Oh, good.
So I'm hoping to watch that soon. Maybe I'll even watch it one evening this week. I would love to see the two of them banter. And again, I'll put a link in the show notes to that. And that novel is out now, and I really enjoyed it. Highly recommend.
Very cool. Nice. Yeah. Amy Bloom, I still need to read her. Is it The White House or White Houses? What is that one that she wrote about Eleanor?
Yeah. That book is so good, Chris.
Yeah. And that's a short one, too. I'd be able to finish that in a day.
Yeah. I'll Be Right Home is short also.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Oh, you should read that. I don't want to should you, but I think you would really like it.
All right. Well, maybe if we end up reading on the porch, that's what I'll bring.
Right on. Do you have any upcoming reads?
I do. The Margaret Fuller reading group is kicking off. We've chosen July 13th as our first Zoom discussion date, and we'll be discussing Summer on the Lakes.
Right on.
Yeah, Fuller's first book, and it was about travel that she did, which was back then in 1842 when she took this trip. Kind of bold for a woman to do such a trip from the East Coast to the Great Lakes. So she traveled by a variety of vehicles, and water vehicles included in that, and also got to see some of the treatment of Native American people who were being displaced at that time. Is displaced the right word? Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, so we will be discussing that. It's part travelogue and part experimental writing because she tells stories, there's poetry. It's really interesting, and I'm looking forward to not only reading it, but to have people to discuss it with. So that's on July 13th, which is the same day as Colleen's group getting together to discuss Willa Cather's A Lost Lady. Those will be really good to read together. So we're having a double header because there's cross-pollination between both groups. Margaret Fuller's Summer on the Lakes is about the early settlers moving west, right, in 1840s. And then A Lost Lady is about the second wave of pioneers that came in. So these were the people who established the railroads and stuff after the farmers had already been starting to work the land. It's about their twilight years. So they'll be very interesting to discuss on the same day. I'm mentioning them now and letting you know the dates because if you should want to read these books but not officially participate in the groups, you're still welcome to send emails with your thoughts on it or questions that you may have.
I'm so glad you finally kicked this off because I know you've been wanting to read her. So kudos to you.
We're reading the new collected writings of Margaret Fuller, the new Library of America edition, and we're planning to read it now through September 22nd.
And if you want more information, don't hesitate to email us at bookcougars@gmail.com.
And now what about you? What's coming up for you?
Well, I have a copy of Beautyland by Mary Helen Bertino, which is a novel that got a lot of raves when it came out last year. It's now out in paperback, which is what I have a copy of. This is about a child who is born and is a little bit different from a faraway planet, and she uses a fax machine to report back on the oddities of Earthlings. This is going to be my companion on my flight home. Aunt Ellen read it and told me I must get my hands on a copy. And when Aunt Ellen tells me to do something, I generally do. Mm-hmm. So I have that one. And then I also have Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, which is a square on our bingo card. This is a classic ghost story that I've always wanted to read. And that is one that I'm doing as a buddy read. There is a Goodreads buddy thread that I will put a link in the show notes to. And I'm hoping to have this read by July 29th. So I'm planning to discuss it on episode 239 on July 29th. I would love to have people read along with me. There have been people commenting on the Goodreads thread about the different audiobook versions. So I haven't decided. I'm probably just going to try different ones and see what works for me. I appreciate all of you piping in and letting me know what has and hasn't worked for you. And I also have a lovely paper copy that I picked up in a little free library. So those are the two coming up for me. We have a lot of dates that we've been putting out. So let's do a quick recap that July 15th, we'll be talking about The Garden by Clare Beams, which is a buddy read.
Yes.
There also is a good read thread for that. July 27th is our next Patreon reading salon. If you've been thinking about joining Patreon, please do think about it. You can join for a month and then stop if you decide you don't want to. If you join at the $5 level or above, you're welcome to the reading salon. July 27th, 7 p.m. We haven't picked the subject matter, but we will by then. And then August 17th is our Q3 read-along, where we're doing companion reads.
Yes, we're doing The Upstairs House by Julia Fine. This is a novel. It is under 300 pages, so it's not as big as The Good House, which we read last quarter. And along with that, we'll also be reading The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman, which is a classic story.
Both of these qualify for squares on your bingo card. And we did have someone on Goodreads ask if there's an order that we should read them in. Brooke asked that question. I think I'm going to read The Yellow Wallpaper and then read The Upstairs House. Do you have a feeling on that, Chris?
I would read The Yellow Wallpaper first. Yeah, because I think when a book or story is inspired by something, it's good to read the primary source if you are able to. Like Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia was inspired by The Yellow Wallpaper, and there's distinct wallpaper things happening in that story as well. And I think it's just one of those stories written by an American woman that has influenced so many other, not just American women writers, but women writers and other gendered writers as well.
Yeah. And it's really short. It's like 20 pages or something like that. So get in there and read it. We're really looking forward to having a conversation with all of you about that, all of these books and events. Join us.
Books, books, books.
Books, books, books. Bookish friends. The best.
Jinx. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening, and we wish you lots of happy reading. Thanks for listening to The Book Cougars with Chris Wallach and Emily Fine. We'll be back again with another episode in 2 weeks. Until then, come chat with us on social media, Goodreads, or email us at bookcougars@gmail.com. If you'd like to help support our podcast, please tell others about us, leave a review wherever you listen, and consider becoming a patron. Even $1 a month is a big help. Learn more about that on our website, bookcougars.com, where you'll find the show notes for this and all of our past episodes.
Thanks, everybody.
This episode was edited by Pat Keogh Sound Design.